Hi, I am Sophia from the Leadership's Grand Theory podcast, and today we have someone with us who needs little to no introduction. We have Kenneth Maxwell Nance, the founder of Leadership's Grand Theory, the long sought-after general theory for leadership by a generation of scholars. He is a leadership scholar practitioner, scientist, with over 4 decades in the field, having led in one of the world's largest organizations. While there, he was rated at the top of the top 10% of his peers, internationally for a career. Kenneth Maxwell is highly decorated, highly educated, highly experienced, and highly concerned about the lives and livelihoods of people globally. If you want to know more about this leadership genius, just do a search on the internet to find out so much more about him. Since his recent focus is on intervening in world crises and preventing them in the future, the time he spends with us today is precious, so let's get right to the subject matter for today. You began a newsletter to create a dialogue and promote understanding about leadership by its grand theory, so what is the latest newsletter about?
In our last newsletter article, we promised a discussion on the leadership new definitions grounded in leadership's grand theory, which have the support of empirical and scientific evidence. The leadership definitions are descriptive, prescriptive, predictive, and preventative. The intent of the newsletter article, like this podcast, is to begin an informative discussion to promote understanding. The emerged definitions for leadership, to the degree possible, identify and explain the nature and basis of essential qualities for leaders and leadership that makes the phenomenon distinctive from other practices. The definitions make leadership different from common influence, management, headship, presidential authority, and other actions stemming from other positions. When definitions define a term, one can learn far more from them than the basics. Often enough, a reason people look to dictionaries is to define unfamiliar words or terms. A basic function of a dictionary is to define and/or describe terms or words. According to one dictionary, define means to state precisely the meaning of, to describe the nature, properties, or essential qualities of, to determine the boundary or extent of, to delineate the form or outline of, and to fix with precision, to specify. In an Inc. magazine interview by James Ledbetter with Tony Robbins, a life and business strategist, the interviewer asked for a definition of leadership. He responded in a way that communicated the little help dictionaries provide for the terms leader and leadership. Before providing his insight, Tony mentioned a dictionary definition for a leader as one who leads, and then both laughed about the helpfulness. There was no mention of a dictionary definition for leadership. He went on to state, "I believe that leadership is really a skill of influence." We will discuss this point later in the podcast. Tony stated after further questioning, the chokehold on the growth of any business is always the psychology and the skill set of a leader. It's 80% psychology and 20% mechanics. I don't think of leadership as a position, I see it as a skill. Other people don't have to follow you to be a leader. I think to be able to influence the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, and actions of another human being, that's what leadership is. When he mentioned psychology and a few other elements of life, Tony gets closer to leadership than most others who called themselves experts before heading into an amalgamation of leadership, entrepreneurship, management, and life discussion.
That is really great. Now, please tell us about the current conditions in the world with the absence of precise definition.
The questions asked by the interviewer and examples about definition convey the state and search for understanding of leadership. It has not been clear, contributing to what we see in the world and workplaces for the past decades. We see low confidence and trust in the polls and multiple crises in the world. According to a joint survey by the Milken Institute and the Harris Poll, 63% of the survey's participants held the opinion that their leaders are out of touch with the rest of the country. The Odgers-Berndtson Leadership Confidence Index 2020 revealed that across the world, only 15% of executives are actually confident in their leaders to deliver. The world is experiencing multiple human-made crises. So, what is the problem?
Kenneth Maxwell, if you would please provide us with a rationale for the current state we see and experience.
First, leadership lacked a central theory that applied to leadership in any context. We now have leadership's grand theory, the long sought-after theory by a generation of scholars. Then, without a general theory but enough mid-range and local theories, nominal leadership became what people saw or thought in a microcosm, largely anecdotal, and exacerbated by increasing definitions in academia contributed to the obfuscation. What is commonly seen and understood in the world is nominal leadership at best. However, we have cases that stand out where some of the essences of leadership can be understood, such as with King Sejong, Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., and a few others. These are not perfect, as no human is perfect. However, their actions led to positive impacts on the lives and livelihoods of people. There are successful CEOs, executives, and other people in positions who attain goals, but it does not necessarily mean there is a practice of leadership. If a leadership practice did not exist, the practitioner or organization has little idea of what it could have achieved, its real potential or possibility. Had those in global positions practiced leadership in 2004, we could have avoided the current pandemic. We are making it through with over 6 million deaths, with an estimated 11 trillion in costs and 24 trillion in lost output, according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF. The current definitions gave no thought or consideration for the conditions of the people following or being influenced. In research, scientists are cautious about making causal claims. Some understand latent variables exist or other factors at work not seen with the eye. If one called a leader has people around them giving the appearance of followers, it may not be the case. In militaries, there are many nominal leaders and fewer leaders. Often enough, rules are followed and not necessarily the one called leader. Too many do only the bare minimum to avoid penalty. Have you ever observed what people do in building lobbies when it is time for retreat? In one military force, some officers resourced to provide quality food for its soldiers instead facilitated the delivery of poor quality food and pocketed the proceeds. The problem of corruption was not only present in the military but elsewhere in the government. You may remember what occurred at the prison in Abu Ghraib. In an investigation report of the matter, leadership failures, ineffective leadership, lack of leadership, poor leadership, and absence of leadership were mentioned throughout the document. Understand, although one may have command, authority, or responsibility over many, however, the related people hold various dispositions as they appear to follow.
We are really excited about the new definitions. Please tell us about them.
Definitions are important for the sense-making, but all too often for leadership, they reflect the usage of the term in society or context and do not state or set forth the meaning, explain or identify the nature or essential qualities of, fix or lay down clearly and definitely, specify distinctly, or define responsibilities. To date, we have not found such definitions associated with leadership. Merriam-Webster states that if we define a word, it does not mean that we have approved or sanctioned it. The new definitions related to leadership based on leadership's grand theory, science, and empirical evidence. A leader is one who practices leadership. Leadership is a complex multiple triadic relational practice of right influence and/or right inspiration toward purposes and transcendence. According to the nature of the craft of carpentry, one who practices the craft is fittingly called a carpenter. It is evident in the work or practice of the practitioner. The fact this logic has not held for leadership in the past contributes to its current state. Some call heads of groups of people who conspire to murder others a leader. In one infamous case, the mass murderer called himself a leader. Such terms, descriptions, and acts defy the nature of leadership then, and more so today because of leadership's grand theory. When the multi-triadic relational dimensions are not functional, there is degradation, harm, and eventual failure. The same was the result for everyone who called themselves a leader and held a practice of wrong influence. Such influence and leadership are now paradoxes. The more appropriate descriptors such as a murdering head of state, general, party head, or another. There are terms like dark being associated with leadership. The same makes allowance for disturbing practices while opening positions and opportunities to the worst. What do you think? A president is a president with presidential duties, power, and likewise, the chief executive officer, manager, and supervisor. These positions do not necessarily practice leadership because they are responsible and accountable for people, plans, and/or programs. The fact that people are in proximity to those in position does not make the one in the position a leader. Managers manage and supervisors supervise with a leadership practice sometimes present. In many cases, personnel are assigned to a position and do not have the choice of choosing the person they report to or the one that exercises responsibility and accountability in the organization. However, right influence and inspiration aligning with the will of the influenced can occur in such a context when there is a practice of leadership. Therefore, the leader should be determined by the practice of leadership.
This is really good stuff, Kenneth Maxwell. I do not believe I ever heard of the multiple triadic relational practice in leadership. Please explain after the intermission. To our listeners, we are glad that you joined us for part 1 of a great episode. This is the deepest I have been in the subject of leadership, and we have only just begun to cover definitions. Kenneth Maxwell, the leadership scholar, practitioner, scientist, has so much more in store for us in part 2. Due to the limitations on this platform, you can catch the rest of the podcast at the posting marked part 2 or at our podcast link. This is Sophia. We look forward to you joining us for part 2.